On this channel, we've covered many cases of incel criminals over the years. These have ranged from everything from more widely known cases to lesser known deep dives. Today we're going to get into the story of 3 different incel criminals who have gone largely unreported on in Western media over the last several years. At this point, I really do feel like a broken record, but we can't really go over the topic at hand without first explaining what an incel is. Given that I still do get a lot of comments on my channel saying that they hadn't heard of an incel before my videos, I'll give a quick rundown of what they are and what they do. Incel is short for involuntary celibate, and they're basically people who can't get a woman no matter how hard they try. While many of them are purely an incel in the technical sense and don't really participate in the community, a whole lot of them do. These communities tend to harbor a lot of hatred for society, feeling that they've been deprived of a normal life, the whole wife and kids situation, and especially being angry that they can't get any sex while other men can. Over the years, all of this has led to many of them lashing out in violence. We've seen everything ranging from people planning to carry out an attack and failing to actually do it to full-on mass killings. Today we're going over a few mostly unknown criminals of this variety, so let's get started. Armando Hernandez Jr. Here's a story that took place in Glendale, Arizona. This is the story of Armando Hernandez Jr., who, by his own admission, grew up as part of a happy family. Every Friday night, they would cook some sort of huge meal together, and every Saturday they would go on a drive out of town to go enjoy themselves. All things considered, it seemed like he had a good childhood, playing video games with his friends, going to skate parks, and simply enjoying himself. He never seemed too odd. Things began to change as Armando began attending high school. This was when he became a complete loner and stopped hanging out with his friends outside of class. At school, he got smacked, outright punched, pushed around, and called a weirdo fairly regularly. He was also heavily taunted for not having a girlfriend and seeming like he would never get one. After a while, he began to have thoughts of ending it all. He decided that, rather than take himself out, he would rather kill people, though. Armando really went over the edge after graduating from high school. Now that he didn't have at all too much to do with his time, he started going down some internet rabbit holes. He spent a whole lot of time on his phone, scrolling through endless memes and checking out different hate-related pages. He really liked to delve deep into mass shootings, especially if they took place at a school. He would look into each and every one he could find, taking more of an interest in serial killers and weaponry as well over time. Unlike a lot of young men who fall down into this kind of rabbit hole, Armando identified a lot more with the left side of politics. He would proudly proclaim that he was red, stating that he was a communist. He was even looking into joining some sort of left-wing militia, especially Antifa. He spent a good chunk of time watching a lot of footage of their protests and videos about their ideologies on YouTube. While he stated at the time that this would have been for protection and not for an opportunity to commit violent acts, his obsession with violent shootings and weaponry told a very different story. Armando began to consider himself to be an incel. After all, he was in the most literal sense of the definition. In the end, he could not get a woman no matter how hard he tried. Unlike most incels, though, Armando never really did care too much for other members in the same group. He felt that it was pretty pathetic that most of them looked up to Elliot Rodger as some sort of godlike figure. When speaking of other incel killers, he said that he didn't quite admire what they did and actually did find it to be morally wrong. However, it's very clear that Armando was fairly conflicted. While he would speak of other killers being pathetic and talk more of being interested in his own protection, he did not practice what he preached. In March of 2020, he went out and got his hands on an AR-15 type rifle at a pawn shop. He said that this was mainly to protect him from what he called his government conspiracies. He said that he felt that COVID was created by the US government and that aliens would be coming at any time. He wanted to save his money to buy an armored vehicle to go survive out in the wilderness. He chose to never talk to his family about any of these thoughts or his violent ideations in general. He felt that the whole thing would only break their hearts, so he made an effort to appear as normal to them as possible. He and his younger brother would go shooting at the target range sometimes, so nobody thought anything of it when they would see him taking care of his gun or even loading it up at home. This was intentional so that Armando would never raise any suspicion. Armando decided that he wanted to target young people his age as revenge for the bullying that he had endured. He had been mulling around the idea of committing an attack like this for around 3 to 4 years at this point. He said that mainly he wanted other people to feel the pain that he felt on a daily basis. Mainly he wanted to target couples, especially young couples around his age, feeling that he would never get to have what they had. Feeling defeated, feeling like a woman would never want him, he decided that he wanted to shoot at least 10 people. Armando began to scope out a large shopping district in Glendale called the Westgate Entertainment District. One afternoon in May, Armando's brother saw him loading up his gun in his bedroom. Feeling that he was probably going to the range, he didn't think much of it. Armando told his family that he would be heading out to hit the gym. Instead, he went to a Panda Express to get some food, but ultimately was never able to get his meal for whatever reason. On this afternoon, May 20th, 2020, he sat in his car near Westgate with his rifle and 3 30-round magazines. He began to call 3 of his old friends, asking all of them to hang out with him. When all 3 of them said that they couldn't come out on such short notice, he became enraged. He then decided that he wanted to go to the movies, but realized he wouldn't be able to due to the pandemic restrictions. While Westgate in general had reopened after lockdown, the theater still hadn't. This sent him over the edge completely. He told himself that, if only the movie theater was open, he would surely be able to take some girls out on dates there. In his fury, he decided that the movie theater being closed was the last straw. After walking around for a bit, Armando returned to his car. He sat down inside and decided to film a video for social media. Getting on a Snapchat, he began to record himself. He rambled to the camera, saying that he was done. Beer in hand, he told viewers, "I'm going to be the shooter of Westgate 2020, before turning the camera to show his AR-15 in the back seat of his car. He uploaded the video, saying, "Let's get this done, guys," before heading out.
I'm gonna be the shooter of Westgate 2020.
He walked around Westgate, scoping out the whole scene before returning to his car to grab his weapon. Armando started up a live stream as he pulled out his rifle, loaded it, and headed out into the crowd. He sent the stream to a girl that he was interested in. Recording with one hand and holding his gun with the other, he began to open fire.
He actually posted video of the shooting live on Snapchat. His high school pal Devin Cordoba watched the attack unfold live.
I saw him pulling up at Westgate and loading up the gun and telling him that he's going to be the 2020 shooter of Westgate. And I was like, what's going on? Just wants to just go back to normal society. So that's why he want to start shooting people, that's what he said.
You think that's related to coronavirus?
Yeah.
The police immediately got several calls at 7:25 p.m. reporting an active shooter. The first 2 victims would be spotted outside of a restaurant. Their names were Alfredo and Destiny. Alfredo had wanted some new clothes, so Destiny decided to help him shop at Westgate now that the malls were open again. While out and about, they picked up their order at a restaurant and sat down at one of the outside tables. When a few other people sat down with them, Destiny asked if they could move away to maintain social distance. She never realized that this would leave her and Alfredo as the only 2 people in the line of sight, looking very much like a couple. Destiny called home and asked if someone could pick her up soon. Then she noticed someone running past as she began to hear gunshots. She turned around to see that there was indeed a man with a gun walking around. Well, she and Alfredo started running. Little did she know, Armando had already spotted the young man and woman and considered them to be a prime target. They soon realized that Armando was clearly chasing after them specifically. Destiny heard a few more shots and, shortly after, found her legs giving out as she collapsed down to the ground. She had been shot straight through one of her legs. Adrenaline pumping, she dragged herself across the ground until she was in a bed of rocks behind a nearby tree. She saw Alfredo turn around to come get her before blood sprayed from his chest. Armando had shot him twice in the torso and shattered his ribs. He collapsed to the ground as well as Destiny screamed out to him. A few of the stray bullets hit some power boxes and electrical equipment outside of the mall, leading to a large-scale blackout over the whole area, only sending people into that much more of a panic as those who were inside would have to hide from the killer in the dark. At home, Armando's brother had logged into Snapchat and seen his video. Shocked, he immediately called his brother. Armando actually picked up, with gunshots being audible on the line. His brother shouted at him, "Dude, what are you doing? Are you out of your mind?" Armando responded by quickly blaming society and the government for what he was doing before abruptly hanging up. The brother then called their father to tell him that Armando was committing a mass shooting somewhere. A pregnant woman on the scene named Stephanie Vasquez was also shot at. While she wasn't hit, she fell to the ground right on her stomach while trying to flee and dodge the bullets. In complete shock, she couldn't move as her husband pulled her into hiding. As reality set in, with people and kids crying and screaming everywhere, the complete chaos sent her into early contractions. As Armando moved throughout the shopping complex, he fired more shots at random people, missing each time. While he said that these shots were only fired as a form of intimidation, it's unknown if that's the case. He then came across his next victim, a woman trying to hide in the parking lot between a couple of cars. He shot at her, hitting her in the leg, leading to a through-and-through shot. She fell to the ground near her car. As she begged for her life, Armando began to yell at her on livestream that this was all society's fault. He shouted the phrase social madness at her several times. She said that she had nothing to do with any of that and that he had already shot her, begging him to move on. Surprisingly, he did what she said and moved on without shooting her again. Armando's plans began to fall apart when his gun jammed. By now, a few minutes had passed and police were on the scene. When the police surrounded him, he surrendered, unable to fight back. Unsurprisingly, in addition to those who were at the mall, many people on Armando's friends list who had seen the live stream had also contacted the police. Armando, now having given up, told the police that he intended to shoot 10 people, although he didn't specify why he chose that number specifically. In questioning, he told the police that he had been bullied his whole life. He said that he committed the attack to gain some respect. When asked if this was respect for incels in general, he denied that, saying that he only wanted respect for himself. It goes without saying that Armando was facing a whole lot of charges, over a dozen felonies in fact. As it turns out, like it does in many of these cases, Armando had never actually been in any trouble with the law in the past. The police spent the whole night searching the car and his home, and it wasn't too long before they found the social media post that they had been informed about. Workers with the power company were able to restore electricity to the area within a few hours after the attack. A shelter-in-place order that had been given during the attack was lifted later in the night. Businesses in the area would remain closed for several more days as many suffered from gunshot damage and electrical issues. Armando was very talkative during his questioning, answering any questions that the police had for him. He readily identified himself as an incel and told the officers what it was all about. He told them that he was a communist, that he wanted to join a left-wing militia, and that he wanted revenge on society, just everything in general. He fully admitted that he was responsible for everything that had happened that day.
So you posted on Snapchat?
Yes.
Okay.
Posted on Snapchat, I was fired.
What was the purpose of putting it online?
Just so I thought I'd get some respect.
The term incel, do you consider yourself an incel?
I get.
But you did intend to shoot people your age?
Yes.
Both male and female?
Females, yes.
You wanted
I
10?
wanted couples.
You wanted couples?
Mm-hmm.
Because your issues with being able to get a girlfriend?
Yes.
Why couples?
I feel like they make fun of me. Other incels. They like to humiliate us.
Tell me how they make fun of you.
Like, you see it all around. When you make a Tinder, guys like me never get a match.
Do you want respect for you, or did you want respect for other incels?
Respect for me.
Okay.
I never really cared about the other ones. All I know is that the first one was Elliot Roger. Was basically they look up to him as a god.
Do you have respect for those guys for what they did?
Absolutely no.
Okay.
I don't.
So you think what they did is wrong?
I think what they did is pretty wrong.
Okay. But what you did tonight...
What I did tonight is basically what was a mass, right? You would say. Basically, it is a mass, yes. Absolutely wrong with me.
Yeah.
It was a dark side.
He was soon taken into the Maricopa County Jail and charged with 16 felonies. These were 3 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, 3 counts of aggravated assault resulting in serious injury, 1 count of criminal damage, 1 count of recklessly damaging property of a utility, 5 counts of discharging a firearm in city limits, and 1 count of disorderly conduct with a weapon. Officers said that he still might face additional charges moving forward as well.
This was Mr. Hernandez had the purpose of taking out his expressed anger at society, the feeling that he has been bullied, the feeling that women don't want him. He is a self-professed incel, which means he's involuntary or claims he's involuntarily celibate, and was deeply angered by this. In his interview specifically said that he was targeting couples. He suffers from extreme anger. He described, and he was very open about the fact that he has a dark side, and his dark side was coming out.
Stephanie, the pregnant woman on the scene, was rushed to the hospital. Doctors were able to stop her contractions and stabilize her. Her son was born without incident 2 weeks later. Alfredo wasn't looking near as good. Due to the amount of blood he had lost, he couldn't have surgery for a full 2 days. He was put into a medically induced coma, hooked up to ventilators. Due to COVID being in full swing, his family couldn't even come in to see him. When the surgery finally took place, they were able to remove all of the bullet fragments, patch up his lung, and fix his ribs. His doctor said that it was a miracle that he even survived at all. Destiny went through a lot as well, having 7 surgeries to fix the damage in a short time after the attack. Even then, more surgery would be required, but she decided that she didn't want to go through with any more of them. After getting a skin graft, she was finally able to see Alfredo for the first time several days later when she was placed into a normal room at the hospital. It took months for Alfredo to get back to work as Destiny slowly learned how to walk again. Armando made his first court appearance shortly after the attack. The prosecuting attorney identified him as an incel, explaining to the jury what it meant and the implications of it. The prosecutor showed that he had been planning the attack for years. Armando said that he only wanted to, quote, engage and cause impacts on couples, but not kill anyone, although he did relent and say that he supposed they could have died from bleeding out. Shooting Alfredo twice in the chest made his claims a little hard to believe. The judge set his bail at $1 million. While the news media widely reported that Armando looked up to Elliot Rodger and called him a god, this was actually a misunderstanding. Within his interrogation, he said that other incels saw him as a god and that he found it pathetic. However, given what he did, it seems very unlikely that he wasn't inspired at least in part by Elliot in addition to many other mass killers. In July of 2022, Armando Hernandez Jr. was sentenced to 44 years in prison and 7 years of supervised probation, the maximum for what he did. After he's out, he will never be allowed to own a weapon again and will never be allowed back into the Westgate area. He will likely, at some point, have to pay an unspecified amount in restitution to the families of his victims. When he was asked if he had anything to say to his victims, he cracked a smirk before saying, "This is the dark side of me. Absolutely was. I believe I have a big heart, but this was the dark side of me." Oguzhan Sert. Oguzhan Sert was born in Toronto, Canada, to a father from Turkey and a mother from Mexico. They divorced when he was pretty young, which seems to have heavily affected him as a child. He was known to be both lonely and depressed as a teenager, leading to him being bullied relentlessly all throughout school, especially when he got into high school. By the time he was in 9th grade, he told his parents that he wouldn't be going to school any longer. Surprisingly, they allowed this, and he never stepped foot in class ever again. At some point, his mother, who he lived with, did try to get some help with him, mainly in the mental health department. His doctor suggested that he take medication and actually prescribed him some, but he never did come to take it. In seemingly some sort of act of rebellion, he instead moved out of his mother's home and went to live with his father. He would then spend out the rest of his days in his father's basement, usually on his computer. He never really did anything but sit around watching YouTube videos detailing conspiracy theories, mainly anti-Semitic ones, and of course the world of incels. He came to discuss all of the regular incel talking points on both social media and on his Steam account, where he called himself both a proud incel and a seeker of martyrdom on his profile, where he also wrote that he deeply hated feminists. While it isn't likely that he ever really met that many women in real life, given that he dropped out of school at around 15 years old and stayed in his basement ever since, the incel forums he visited online told him that he should, so he did. By the time he was 17 years old, Oguzhan was in full swing within the incel community. He came to idolize Elliot Rodger, like many did, but surprisingly he actually came to respect Alek Manassian so much more. Given that Alek Manassian was also an incel from Toronto, he found him to be quite the inspiration, later saying, "Especially so close in Toronto, I thought it was possible to do something like that as well." His beliefs came to get more radical and nonsensical as he went down the rabbit hole. It wasn't too long before he was saying that people like him deserve to have an entire country of their own. He said that he couldn't advocate for that right without hurting women, it was just inevitable. If he didn't, he said, nobody would take us seriously. He then bought himself a 17-inch sword. On the blade, he carved the words Thought Slayer. It was very clear that he had a plan in place. He began to spend the next several months thinking about how exactly he would carry out his revenge on society, but the plan he would ultimately decide upon would be anything but sophisticated. On the 24th of February in 2020, Oguzhan woke up just like he did on any other day. This day would be different though. He decided that this would be the day that he carried out the attack he had been planning for months. He greeted his father and stepmother that morning, wearing a long coat, a hat, and sunglasses as he left the house. In his pocket, he was carrying both a sharpening stone, meaning that he was likely planning to use his sword in quite a few attacks, along with a memo written on lined paper stating, "Long live the Incel Rebellion." He left his house and headed towards a spa that was less than 2 miles from home. He had heard online that any woman who worked in a spa was a secret prostitute, so he decided this would be the prime place to carry out an attack. He walked inside and headed into the lobby, coming up to the front desk. As the receptionist, Ashley Arzega, greeted him, he pulled out his sword. He quickly lunged forward and stabbed her in the neck. Pulling his sword back out, he continued to repeatedly stab her in the neck over and over again. She tried to fight back, but it was no use. She fell down to the ground. Oguzhan then stood over her and continued to slash at her as she laid on the ground. Altogether, she suffered 42 injuries from the sword, 15 of those wounds being defensive in nature. The owner of the spa, a woman who has just been called JC, was getting ready for a dentist appointment that she would be leaving for at any minute. That was when she heard the commotion downstairs, followed by screaming. She ran downstairs to see what was happening, seeing Oguzhan standing there over a large pool of blood, locking eyes with him. She turned to flee the building, but the door got stuck. As she struggled to open it, Oguzhan chased after her. She fell down onto the floor as he stabbed and slashed at her repeatedly. One defensive wound was so intense that he cut her hand to the point where bones were visible and almost cut off her finger. He repeatedly screamed at her that she was a whore while he continued slashing, shouting, "Die, die, die," rhythmically as he cut her. JC's brother-in-law was waiting outside to take her to the dentist. Hearing something going on inside, he decided to open the door to the spa. He couldn't get it open either, but this time it was because Oguzhan and JC were wrestling on the ground right in front of it. Oguzhan used one hand to place over her mouth to get her to stop screaming, loosening his grip on the sword. This gave JC just enough leverage to overcome him, take the weapon, and stab it straight deep into his back. Oguzhan then fell to the ground, defeated. JC stood up, this time running for the back door of the business instead. She ran into a nearby business, completely covered in injuries, and told them to call the police. The emergency services were called and arrived very shortly. Surprisingly, Oguzhan was still alive. The both of them were quickly carted off to the hospital. Ashley Arzega was not so lucky, already having had passed at the scene. While in the ambulance to the hospital, Oguzhan was able to talk to a few of the paramedics. He happily told them, "I wanted to kill everyone in the building, and I'm happy I got one." When the police came to speak to him, he told them everything. The note reading, "Long live the Incel Rebellion," was brought up. Oguzhan told them, "I wanted everyone to find it. I wanted the world to know that people like us exist, and it's not really fair." Unfortunately, the public was left in the dark on this case for quite some time. Given that Oguzhan was still 17 years old at the time of the crime, his name and a lot of information was withheld from the public for several years. To this day, an actual photo of him still never has leaked. When the police searched his home, they found plenty of incriminating Google searches, including a lot of different, separate searches for both Elliot and Alec. When the police asked him why he became an incel, he told them, "You don't choose to become an incel, you are born one." He further elaborated, saying, "I was thinking about this incel ideology. I guess that's why I chose that spot. Some incels say prostitutes are taking advantage of their bodies and gaining money as a result." Given that he was a minor, Oguzhan was only facing a maximum of 10 years in prison for the murder. However, the police, with all the information he had given them, had one ace up their sleeve. Given that Oguzhan had specifically talked about being involved in these hate-fueled movements and had listed himself as a martyr, they decided to hit him with charges of terrorism as well. For it to stick, the prosecutors would have to prove that the incel subculture does carry an actual concrete ideology and that it isn't just a loose organization of like-minded individuals on the internet. They would also need to prove that he was committing the crime to, in a literal sense, terrorize people by intimidating them. Oguzhan's defense took a different strategy. They said that he was nothing but a confused, lonely child who lacked any real parenting in his life. They said that he had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, social anxiety, and had bouts of major depression, one of which he had been experiencing shortly before his attack. He also appeared to have limited intellect, saying that this made him more vulnerable to the conspiracy theories he was reading. Oguzhan's demeanor in court did make this convincing, with him mostly blankly staring forward while tugging at his ears and his beard from time to time. His lawyer described him as not loved enough, friendless, bullied, uneducated, ignorant to the world, and choosing to lash out for no reason but because other introverts hidden in the dark share their conspiracy theories about why they are mistreated. However, in the end, it was very apparent that Oguzhan understood and believed the ideologies he practiced. Not only that, he carried out the attack with the full intention of getting what he called respect for the incel community by terrorizing the people they were against. The judge agreed that this constituted an act of terror, saying that it would require the entire might of the correctional programming system to ever rehabilitate him at this point. He said that Oguzhan had shown a degree of maturity in his planning of the attack and noted that he searched for and viewed all of the pages relating to the ideology of his own volition, not because anyone enticed him to do so. So, in May of 2020, the charges against him were upgraded to those of murder, terrorist activity, and attempted murder, terrorist activity. The court was shown a 20-minute montage of security camera footage showing Oguzhan leaving his home, entering the spa, and stabbing Ashley Arzaga. JC spoke to the news media, saying that she hoped Oguzhan would end up with the maximum sentence for what he had done. Oguzhan, on the other hand, said that he didn't expect to even live for this long. He fully believed that the police would kill him during his attack. Now he was left with a life in shambles and no way to get out of it. He said, "It wasn't worth it. My life is ruined now," before detailing his fears of how other inmates in prison would treat him after they learned about him. He pled guilty to the charges. The judge asked if he understood the ramifications of that, being that he would be waiving his right to both a full trial and an appeal. He slumped his head down and softly responded, "Yes." Oguzhan went on to apologize to Ashley's family and friends, as well as to JC. By the time it was all over, he was 20 years old. He told them that he is a changed man and that he no longer hates women. He ended by saying, "I've come to realize that life is so much more than just internet negativity. I wish I could travel back in time and talk some sense into my former self." His lawyers hoped to get him a fairly light sentence under the Youth Criminal Justice Act. However, this would require him to complete an intense rehabilitation program in a facility with other individuals like him. He was afraid of sharing a cell with anyone else, so he refused this option. So, with no other choices left, in November of 2023, he was sentenced to life in prison with another 3-year sentence for attempted murder. In 10 years, he will have the possibility of parole. Tobias Rathjen. This is the strange story of a 43-year-old man in Germany named Tobias Rathjen. Tobias spent a good chunk of his life online, where he dabbled into all sorts of extremism. He was very, very conservative and nationalist, actively writing to his personal website online about his beliefs. He delusionally felt that he was such a pioneer in his field that he even accused Donald Trump of stealing some of his slogans. Tobias really harbored a large hatred for immigrants. While he wouldn't go into much detail about hating specific races or religions, he did go into a lot of detail about having a hatred for immigrants from the Middle East, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, and Northern Africa. In fact, he called for them to be completely exterminated and wiped from the face of the earth. His hatred extended to his own people as well, though, if they differed from his view when it came to politics. He called any other Germans who supported immigration as impure. He was also a big supporter of eugenics. This is because he said that, because of his own psychological issues, he would never be able to get a woman. Tobias wrote that he had been guided by the voices in his head for as long as he could remember, adding that secret agents had been following him for his entire life. While it isn't clear if he actually ever referred to himself as an incel, he did view a lot of material along those lines and complain about his life in very much the same fashion. At other times, though, he would explain that he was willingly abstaining from getting into a relationship. This would lead to a big debate as to whether he was more part of the incel movement or the men going their own way movement, with the only difference really being whether or not his celibacy was voluntary. However, it was clear to most that his celibacy was not really self-imposed, especially after he himself said that he could never get a woman due to his own psychological problems. Tobias recorded several videos of himself going on long-winded rants and even wrote a manifesto. He said that exposing society's flaws like this made him a real German Edward Snowden. He debated on carrying out some sort of mass killing himself. Although he was in his 40s, he debated on going down the route of attacking a school, any school with a high migrant population. He proudly uploaded all of this to his website, even bragging to his father about it and urging him to spread the link far and wide. He even tried to spread the message by spray painting the URL to his website all over town. Tobias contacted the German police, telling them about several of his conspiracy theories and about his paranoid fantasies involving secret agents. He wrote a letter to the Public Prosecutor General outlining how these secret underground organizations were hacking into people's brains to control world events. He told the authorities to feel free to approach him and collaborate with him to take them down. He was completely ignored and nothing was done in response. Tobias was able to get his hands on 3 different guns, all legally. He was able to get one more by borrowing it from a gun trader. On February 19th, 2020, Tobias felt that it was time to carry out the attack that he had been fantasizing about for so long. It appeared that his inability to get a woman due to his wild beliefs was the last straw in his already troubled life. However, while he was motivated by his hatred for women, he would end up taking his anger out on who he hated the most, which was who he considered to be foreigners. He hopped into his car and headed out to the La Vautre bar in central Hanau, Germany. He walked into the bar brandishing a CZ-75 pistol. He pointed it straight at the bartender and shot him to death. He then casually left the bar, shooting another man on the sidewalk. He walked over to the nearby Midnight Bar, stood in the doorway, and fired 3 more shots into the building. One of the bullets hit the owner of the bar, killing him on the spot. Witnesses said that they heard at least a dozen gunshots in total. Right after, Tobias decided to switch things up. He then pulled out his Sig Sauer P226 pistol and confronted another man standing at a kiosk on the street. He pointed the gun right towards his head and demanded to know if he was a foreigner. The man, in total shock, didn't say a single word. Tobias appeared to take this as a no and simply left the scene. He then went down the street and around the corner, returning to the area he parked his car, shooting several shots into the car of a man named Willy Viriel Pon. He missed, and when he left, Willy decided to pursue Thomas in his car as he took off. Tobias drove out to the Arena Bar and Cafe in Kesselstadt, closer to his home, roughly a mile and a half away. Willy tried to call the police 5 times but never did get connected, as each of the operators had their hands full with the mountain of other calls they were getting about the incident. Tobias, knowing that Willy had followed him, got out of his car and shot Willy to death as he sat in his vehicle calling the police. He then went over to a kiosk near the bar and shot at 3 people, killing them all. Afterwards, he stepped inside the bar and began to shoot at customers as they fled. There, he killed 2 more people and left 3 more injured. If the emergency exit to the bar hadn't been accidentally locked, they would have all been able to flee through the back, ending the disaster much earlier. Less than a minute later, Tobias once again left the scene. After that, things all went quiet. The police quickly began a large-scale manhunt and investigation. They reported to the public that their killer was still at large, armed and dangerous. Little did they know, Tobias had simply driven home. There he approached his bedridden mother. In what the police believed to have been a mercy killing, he shot her twice. As police surrounded the home and initiated a standoff, Tobias's father stayed inside and looked up his son's manifesto online. Tobias himself went downstairs and turned the gun on himself, ending the whole incident then and there. In the end, Tobias had killed 4 Germans with Kurdish, Sinti, Cameroonian, and Afghan blood, 2 Turks, a Bosnian, a Romanian, and a Bulgarian. 3 died in the first shooting, 5 in the second, and 1 died 1 day later in the hospital. In addition, he killed 2 full-blooded white Germans, that being himself and his mother. Near the bar where most of the violence took place, the police were able to find several instances of Tobias's URL graffiti strewn about. To keep anyone from looking up the link, they quickly covered it all up. Then the graffiti was soon found in 6 other locations around Hanau as well. While Tobias was dead and justice would not be served, the federal prosecutor still chose to look at the act as an act of terrorism, especially given Tobias's online writings and how he specifically chose to target people he believed were foreigners. As his letters, his manifesto, and his videos were all investigated, it all became abundantly clear as to what his motivations were. Once again, thank you for watching my video. If you found it interesting, please give it a like, it really helps me out in the algorithm, and hey, feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Recently, I've opened up a merch store. There you can get yourself some cool Dire Trip t-shirts and stuff. If you want, go ahead and follow me on social media. If anything would ever happen to this channel, that would probably be the only way you'd ever hear about it. I also really appreciate when people follow me on Patreon. There you can get videos early, ad-free, and uncensored. Channel memberships are back up too, and you get the same benefits there as well. Once again, this has been your host Kyle. Thank you, and good night.